Corinth, 56 CE. A Greek seamstress named Daphne finishes work for the day. Her neighbor mentions she's joined a new group. What Daphne hears next will sound deeply unsettling, not because her neighbor joined something evil, but because of how it sounds to someone on the outside. Here's what Daphne hears. They meet in the dark. They worship a criminal executed in Syria. They say he bought them. They eat his flesh at something called the boss's dinner. They call each other brother and sister, even though they're not related. And they say there's no male and female among them. What would you think if you heard this about your neighbors? This isn't a horror story. This is how early Christianity actually sounded to ordinary people in the Roman world. The problem starts with language. The religious vocabulary we take for granted today carried completely different meanings in everyday Greek. Baptism meant dipping, like dipping cloth in dye. Salvation meant getting healthy or being rescued from danger. Lord's Supper, translated as the boss's dinner, Kyrios, meant master, boss, or owner. Eucharist simply meant thanksgiving. These weren't sacred terms yet. They were ordinary words being repurposed. Imagine hearing that your neighbor joined a group that practices dipping and attends the boss's dinner, where they get healthy. Then there's the God problem. In the ancient Mediterranean, every deity had a name: Zeus, Isis, Mithras, Dionysus. Gods had temples, statues, festivals. You could see them, name them, locate them. Christians worshipped God, but which one? Their deity had no proper name, no image, no temple. To polytheistic neighbors, this wasn't monotheism. It was no theism. Christians were literally called atheists because they rejected all recognizable deities. The most religious-seeming people appeared to have no religion at all. Now let's examine the practices that really raised eyebrows. Christians centered their devotion on a Jewish man executed by Rome as a criminal. Crucifixion was reserved for the lowest of the low: slaves, rebels, the despised. The empire used it specifically to humiliate. Claiming this executed man was divine, was still alive, and had bought you sounded like either madness or a slave cult. No respectable Roman would worship someone the state had publicly destroyed. Yet Christians made this shameful death their central symbol. The language of consuming Christ's body and blood at communal meals sparked genuine rumors of cannibalism. Early Christian writers had to defend themselves against these accusations repeatedly. The irony? Many early Christians were actually vegetarians, but the language was shocking enough that outsiders didn't wait for clarification. When you hear someone talking about eating flesh and drinking blood at secret gatherings, you don't typically ask follow-up questions. You assume the worst. The insider meaning, spiritual communion, never reached the neighborhood gossip network. The proclamation from Galatians, "In Christ there is no male and female," was theological language about spiritual equality before God. Inside the community, this meant something profound about human dignity. But to outsiders hearing about nighttime meetings, love feasts, and people calling non-relatives brother and sister, it sounded like a recipe for sexual libertinism. Add in the practice of naked baptism. Full immersion required removing clothes, and the rumors practically wrote themselves. Each practice had an innocent explanation. Together, they formed a suspicious pattern. Why meet before dawn or after dark? Probably practical reasons. Members were working people, slaves, artisans, laborers. They couldn't gather during business hours. Sunday wasn't a day off yet, but to neighbors, secretive nighttime gatherings of people using strange language about flesh-eating, erased gender distinctions, and worshipping an executed criminal. This checked every box for a dangerous cult. Roman authorities had crushed similar groups before. The Bacchanalia scandal of 186 BCE remained cultural memory. Secret nighttime religious meetings meant trouble. Here's what this teaches us about understanding history. The same words, the same practices, meant completely different things inside the community versus outside it. Ancient observers weren't stupid or bigoted. They were reasonable people working with limited information, interpreting unfamiliar practices through their own cultural frameworks. We'd likely react similarly. Imagine hearing these descriptions cold, without any context, about a group meeting secretly in your neighborhood. The suspicion makes sense. The misunderstanding was structural, built into the gap between insider meaning and outsider perception. Every insider community, whether religious, professional, or subcultural, develops language that sounds strange to outsiders. Early Christians weren't trying to be weird. They were building vocabulary for experiences they considered transformative. Their neighbors simply didn't have the decoder ring. This pattern repeats throughout history. New movements create new language. Outsiders hear that language through existing frameworks. Misunderstanding follows. Sometimes those misunderstandings have serious consequences. Understanding this dynamic helps us read ancient sources more carefully, and perhaps notice when we're doing the same thing today. Next time you encounter something that seems bizarre or suspicious about an unfamiliar group, pause. Ask yourself, am I hearing what they mean or what it sounds like to me? That question, the gap between insider meaning and outsider perception, sits at the heart of understanding how early Christianity looked to its neighbors.